Me, 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 me.
Mo, 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 mo.
Wah, 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 wah.
Okay, clear doing that reminds me of choirs, right? And the picture that comes in my mind is that YouTube video that's very, very old of the choir boy standing there. They're both standing there singing, and then he pulls out the helium balloon, sucks on it, and just hits
Yes.
that high note. It's just,
Oh my gosh.
oh, the fun things of life.
So good. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Bearded Bible Brothers. I am the bearded Matt Crosswhite from Arizona, joined by the snowbeard himself, Josiah Marshall of Utah. Josiah, how are you today?
Doing well, Firebeard. Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing very well. It was really good to see you and your family, even if briefly, this weekend.
Yes. Oh, yes. That was a blast. It was so good to see you. It's like long time no see, and even our dog's going, "Oh, no times no see."
Yes,
She was
she
so
was so
excited to see you.
excited. Yes, yes. Well,
She
we've
was
got
so
some really
excited.
good topics to cover. So
Yep.
today we're going to be talking about, or at least starting our conversation. We'll see where it goes. But we're going to start with the idea of unchurched or de-churched, and likely touching into um, bullying in the church and
Mhm.
what to do and all of that.
Yeah.
So let's jump in.
First Peter 5 is talking about therefore I urge the congregation leaders among you as a fellow leader and witness to the Messiah's sufferings, as well as a sharer in the glory to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is in your care, exercising oversight, not out of constraint, but willingly, as God wants, not out of a desire for dishonest gain, but with enthusiasm. Also, not as doers domineering over those in your care, but as people who become examples to the flock. The that first sentence in in verse 3, also not as doers domineering over those in your care, really got me thinking about bullying and harassment in church, because it's not just people that you sit next to, right? I've seen it a lot with leaders, unfortunately, but it looking the word up, um, just doing a casual lookup of that word right there, katak uriu, and it's Greek for exercise dominion over, overcome, be lord over, exercise lordship over, to bring under one's power, to subject oneself, to subdue, master, to hold in subjection, to be master of, exercise lordship over. And when I looked that up in the Septuagint, the first place it pops up is Genesis 1:28, when God tells man to dominate, take dominion over the earth, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Which makes sense. But
Hmm.
the same word was also found in Leviticus 24. And the the word associated to it in Hebrew is radah, and it's a primitive root for rule, dominion, take, prevail, reign, or ruler. To rule, have dominion, dominate, tread down, to have dominion, rule, subjugate, to cause, to dominate, to scrape out, scrape out. So the context of this section, though, reads that it's verse 43 in chapter 25, but in the context says, if a member of your people has become poor among you and sells himself to you, do not make him do the work of a slave. Rather, you are to treat him like an employee or a tenant. He will work for you until the year of Yovel. Then he will leave you and his children with him and return to his own family and regain possession of his ancestral land. For they are my slaves, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. Therefore, they are not to be sold as slaves. Do not treat him harshly, but fear your God.
Mm.
And it's
Got
that
it.
same word right there. And so just even the context going on here, because back in First Peter, it talks about being a shepherd, right? Well,
Yep.
one of the things I've been thinking a lot about over the years is Ephesians. What is that? 4, 5, 5. I think it's 5:11, where it talks about the giftings.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4:11. Yeah, right. He gave some people as emissaries, some as prophets, some as proclaimers of the good news, and some as shepherds and teachers. Their task is to equip God's people for the work of service that builds the body of the Messiah. And it goes on to talk about believers coming into maturity. Having worked so much, especially in church planting, I've seen this verse so many times be used as a blueprint. I think I said that back in our church series. And it's not what it's saying, especially when you look closer at it. I mean, good grief, we can say this about so many verses in the Bible that we sure used and thought of, and yeah, it gets almost sad, really, after when you start looking at it, realizing, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't that doesn't mean what I think it means. I hear Princess Bride over and over again in my brain.
Yes.
I don't think it means what you think it means.
Yes.
Inconceivable.
Inconceivable.
I actually, okay, here's a little funny side note. I tried showing that to my kids. My daughter thought it was so weird that she just was not interested. And then when I also talked to my son about finishing the movie, he goes, Dad, I don't want to. Why is that? It's too cheesy. So it's like, did you just say that about Princess Bride?
These days, they don't know good art calling Princess Bride cheesy.
No, they don't. But he's gotten into Planet of the Apes a little bit. We actually watched the original just last night. He still looked at me and goes, Dad, that's still weird, but it's interesting. But if we were to say that about Scripture, look at this verse and say that's weird, because the context. I wanted the let's see, who is that I was reading? It was a commentary on that very chapter. I think it was Craig Evans. No, it wasn't Craig Evans. Craig Keener, and he was saying how this is talking about Jerusalem and the community in Jerusalem, and about how some of them were given to be prophets, teachers, and so forth. And it kind of makes sense when you think about what was going on in that community back in Acts 3, 4, and 5, especially how people were selling their stuff off and coming together and taking care of each other, and how the deacons came about and what the apostles were needing from the deacons and so forth. And what is, in my opinion, what has been argued as a spiritual office is, in my opinion, nothing more than a communal position and responsibility. These people were given the responsibility of using their gifts for the benefit and for the encouragement of the community. They weren't the leaders. They weren't the ones getting up in a pulpit every day or every Shabbat or even the Lord's Day and giving a sermon or anything like that.
I don't know that I would agree that it was specific to Jerusalem, but
I would agree. I would agree. Yeah, I would definitely agree. It was something interesting that Craig Keener was saying, but it would be something that God has definitely put within the body, because that's what he goes on to talk about in the rest of the chapter.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
But you're dead on when you say it's not offices or layers of responsibility. He's listing them off as if they're all equals. Yep. And in our church series, we talked about how what you read in your translation as shepherd is the same thing as pastor, and now we have small church corporations led by a CEO pastor, and a lot of the rest of it is not to be seen or heard from, and all that kind of stuff. But on the topic of bullying within the church, this passage has nothing to do with leadership position of authority, and it's God gave these giftings um, for the edification of the church.
Right.
What it says nothing about them being elders or deacons, which we know he talks about in other letters. They're just, these are giftings for edification, regardless of status, regardless. The purpose of these is to edify and encourage and build up.
And even for a very long time, elders was a sociological position within the Jewish society and community. These were the men that sat at the city gates and dealt out various civil and even just basic conflicts within the community. And yet, and that wasn't to say that they didn't offer some sort of guidance.
Sure.
Paul definitely goes into that when he's talking about elders, but the idea that these are some sort of spiritual governing bodies, that the elders have to be over the pastor. That's why I
or
look
vice
at
versa, depending on your church background.
Right. Because you've got either the government of elders, or you've got the communal the congregational churches, where the congregation's the ones who is doing all the voting and the governing. But even the idea of just having one person getting up on a Sunday morning and falling on his responsibility, and then him being given the position to think, well, my voice carries, my thoughts matter than the others, and they need to be listening to me. Well, right there, even hearing that it's supporting a behavior and a thinking that's antithetical to everything that we're already been reading, especially with the domineering part. But not only is it, I said earlier, communal responsibility. And I kind of like that, because not only is this quote unquote leadership's responsibility, it's the congregational, the communal responsibility of each person. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up today was because bullying and harassment and domination of sorts, especially I think these fall into that category of domineering, is something not only have I experienced from other believers, dating all the way back into even my teenage years, but it became a key factor in a buddy of mine. I've mentioned him before. His name was Matt Hilbelink. And it became a key factor in him wanting to end his own life. And I remember the very long conversations he and I would have about how he would be mistreated, even at just home groups, Bible studies, where he's wanting to just connect with the guys, and the guys would just call him out for his social awkwardness and his some of his mental issues and his emotional
mannerisms
issues
and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I have to remind myself, I shouldn't be surprised by any of this, right?
Yes and no. If these are true believers that are getting closer to Jesus every day, then yeah, there should be an element of surprise. But at the exact same time, in the very next breath, that is a very, very high expectation for the modern American church, that people are actually being discipled and pursuing Jesus and looking more like him. That's the exception, not the rule in modern Western churches. So
yeah,
how does one manage one's expectations in that setting?
There's the key question, right? How do we manage our expectations when our expectations are not only not being met, they're being dashed in so many ways? And what is that? There's been numerous words, but one of them I think it works well is de-churched. Another person used unchurched. I think that was
Sure.
Kyle Eidelman that used unchurched.
Yeah.
And as horrific as that word sounds, at least on a spiritual level, that somebody's just leaving the faith altogether, it has been categorized. It's been talked about, written about so much lately. I mean, good grief. You look at podcasts, you look at radio shows. Julie Roys is one of them who's realizing that this word isn't spiritual. It's institutional.
Yes.
They're leaving an institution. They're not leaving a relationship with God. They're leaving
Right.
They're leaving behind an institution that has been built on a certain methodology, and yet they're finding other ways to appreciate and enjoy the community that can be experienced among believers. It still looks odd because you're not familiar with it and you don't know what exactly to accept your expectations for with that, but at least you have an opportunity to begin approaching each other on a more realistic level, at least to accept the fact I'm just here. I'm needing encouragement, or I want to encourage you. That can be a very basic first step for that getting together. But
absolutely,
when you've got those expectations, what is left to do? What do you do when you're met with these? Now, I remember for him, when he was met with the reality that he was being bullied and harassed, he went directly to the leaders of the church that I was working at. And he told them, I'm really struggling here. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Many pastors are not trained in conflict resolution. And it makes them so uncomfortable that for him, they told him, no, you know what, why don't you go talk to your therapist about this? Or why don't you go talk to someone else about this? And it was as if when they were being met with this reality that it didn't seem to find logic within the system that has been established in churches. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're providing a service for you. We're not here to run a community. We're not here to deal with conflicts that arise. We're not here to be, quote, the elders as they were, even in biblical contexts. We're here to be businessmen. We're here to be showmen. We're here to provide a product or service for you that you come and use. And while I would say that's heavily American, I'm beginning to see it more and more all around the world, sadly. And people are craving more and more this connection that's getting lost. But not to get too far into that thought with what we've already talked about in our church series, still, what do? Is it okay to leave the church? Is it okay to de-church or unchurch, as they've called it? What do you think?
I think it depends on the definition of church that we're using. Yeah. Because if by church we're referring to the structured organization,
right, the institution.
Yeah, institution. Yeah. Thank you. That's the word.
That was the word we were using. Yep.
If that's the definition we're using, yes, absolutely. It is not at all unbiblical to leave that institution. If, however, we're using the Bible's definition of the word church, which some of the institutions give lip service to, but the Bible's definition is church, or the Greek word ecclesia, is not a church word. The word literally means a gathering or an assembly. Yep. And most often it wasn't used in a church religious context. It was used in a civic context. Whether you were assembling for a town hall meeting or your employment guild, the blacksmith guild is assembling together, or the bankers or whatever. It literally just means a gathering. That's it.
Yeah. Right.
No overcomplication. Ecclesia, church, means a gathering. So is it wise to leave a gathering of fellow believers who are loving and pursuing God through Scripture? No. The Bible actively warns against that. In the book of Hebrews, it says, do not forsake the meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. So, but there again, it's a fine line of definitions. Yes, leave the institution. That's great. I mean, the institutions offer very little value. There's nothing wrong with a Jesus rock concert every once in a while, but that's not church. That's not church. A Jesus rock concert and a bad TED Talk is not the Bible's definition of church. And I apologize, we are getting into the realm of where we already went with our church series. But as far as getting somewhere healthy and getting into a community where you can actually experience fellowship.
Yeah.
Not just get your caramel macchiato and go sit down in a row anonymously and then get up and leave, and try to get involved in different types of ministries in this institution. Invite people into your home and say, I've been reading through Genesis or Acts or Revelation.
Yeah.
And I have questions or I have thoughts, or what do you guys think about this? Have conversations, have fellowship. That's church. That's the assembling together. That's what Yeshua was referencing when he said, where two or more are gathered, I will be with them there in their midst. He didn't mean a rock concert.
Right. Exactly. And so it leaves with the question, well, what should I do then? If I'm in a position to where I'm being abused or bullied or harassed, what should I do? Now, we've already talked about going to the leaders, definitely staying in community with people. But what happens when you struggle with the confidence to be able to walk out of something that you are so convinced is something that you should be doing on a Sunday morning? And my suggestion to that would be, look at the Sunday morning a little differently. So say you show up at service and you get into a conversation with somebody in the lobby. Now, you have gone through the pattern that when you walk in and when the service starts, you go into the sanctuary. What would happen, though, if you were to sit there and continue that conversation?
Yes.
Right? Or if your church offers Sunday school, what's the harm of just going to that? Go to that, go to the worship service, and then leave. If you don't want to do the service, then go to the Sunday school class. I've been looking at this several different ways, because while my wife and I had the strength and really it wasn't nearly even the confidence as much as I would say, as just much as the advocacy that we've got to step out of this. We are being battered and we've been broken down in so many ways. We have to step out. We have to step out immediately. But it was still unnerving, because what we had predicated our lives around so much was gone. There was a necessity. We've talked about this before. It was the necessity to reprocess identity and purpose. But at the same time, it was important to us to realize that our emotional health and physical health, for that matter, were important, just as important as our spiritual health. And so while we had, what's so sad is that when we finally left, it was hard to realize that a lot of people that we called friends didn't really give us a second thought after we left. There was no follow-up of how you doing or anything like this. It was just so sad. But then you realize in those moments who the character of a lot of people are. And we did have a small few who were still willing to have a conversation with us. Basic
Christine,
as
I
it
had
was.
the same exact experience.
Who did?
Christine, I had the same exact experience. Yeah.
So it is an unnerving place to be, and it's definitely an uncomfortable place to be. But you have to get to the point where you're willing to ask the question, how important is my emotional, physical health? Because the institution will make spiritual, even metaphorical spiritual, or even nuanced spiritual, the quintessential be-all.
Yeah.
But we can't have this cognitive dissonance, this cognitive bypass to think that this is it, and then something else. Then when we step out of this, then we fall back into our own lives. No, our bodies are going with us into this.
Yes.
Our emotions are going into this with us, and sometimes it takes those quiet moments. I think that's why a lot de-churched during COVID. Because when we finally find those quiet moments and we're able to really think about what we're going through and what we're experiencing and why are we still putting ourselves through this, that you're finally in the position to finally really clearly put together your priorities. Well, we really appreciate you joining with us today. I know this has been a weighty subject, and sometimes we have to really be open, and it's hard to come into these areas of life because they're very personal and they can be very challenging. But this is definitely something that we are hoping to do with this podcast, is definitely being able to bring up this topic and allowing a conversation for it. And we really want and encourage you to write in and tell us what you think about this. So email us at beardedbiblebrothers@gmail.com. And until next time, please keep reading your Bible.